Today, we are taking a deep dive into what is honestly arguably the single most extraordinary constitutional anomaly in all of American history. We're talking about a moment when the very foundations of the U.S. government were put to the ultimate test. Imagine this. One man is asked to step into the highest office in the land, under circumstances that literally no one had ever seen before. Okay, let's dive into this. Picture it. It's August 9th, 1974. The United States is completely reeling from the totally unprecedented resignation of a sitting president, all thanks to the Watergate scandal. Right in the middle of this intense, dramatic climax, Gerald R. Ford steps up, takes the oath of office, and delivers this iconic, incredibly weighty line into the microphone. Our long national nightmare is over. He knew the absolute gravity of the moment, too. He actually acknowledged that he was assuming the presidency under truly extraordinary circumstances, calling it an hour of history that troubled minds and hurt hearts. Section 1. An unprecedented presidency. Let's move to and see how this builds, because you really have to wonder, how exactly does someone ascend to the presidency of the United States, the most powerful elected position in the free world, without a single national vote being cast for him as president, or for that matter, even as vice president? Well, the answer to that wild constitutional puzzle lies in the 25th Amendment. It's the specific legal mechanism that allows the president to nominate a vice president whenever a vacancy pops up. So before Richard Nixon resigned from the presidency, his own vice president, Spiro Agnew, had stepped down. Using this exact 25th Amendment mechanism, Nixon chose Gerald Ford to fill that empty vice presidential seat. And that whole chain of events led to a pretty staggering historical reality. When Nixon eventually resigned, Ford, who was an appointed vice president, suddenly became president. So naturally, Ford then had to fill the vice presidential vacancy that he had just left behind. And he nominated former New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller. I mean, really think about that for a second. For the very first time in American history, both of the highest executive offices in the land were held by men who had been appointed to those specific roles rather than actually being elected to them on a national ticket. Just wild. Section 2. From Michigan to Washington. To understand how he became the clear-cut choice to steady the ship during such a monumental national crisis, we kind of have to look back. And Ford's early life, it's really a profound story of resilience. He was actually born Leslie King Jr. in Omaha, Nebraska in 1913. But to escape terrible physical abuse from her husband, Ford's mother, Dorothy, divorced him and fled. She ended up marrying a businessman from Grand Rapids, Michigan, named Gerald Ford, who gave his new stepson his name. From there, this young man built a highly accomplished background long before he ever touched politics. He was a star football player at the University of Michigan, went on to earn a law degree at Yale, where he also helped out as an assistant coach, and then proudly served his country as a Navy lieutenant commander during World War II. Shortly after coming back to practice law, he married Betty Bloomer and was elected to Congress in 1948. So the crucial point is, it was what he did over the next 25 years in the House of Representatives that truly defined his destiny. Ford built an absolute rock-solid reputation for integrity, for openness, and for comedy. I mean, he was so deeply respected by his peers that they elected him Republican leader in 1965. And his immense popularity, it wasn't just on his own side of the aisle. It was incredibly widespread across the board. When Nixon needed a steady, trusted hand to replace Spiro Agnew, Ford's sterling character made him the perfect unifying choice. Section 3. Healing and hard choices. Now, being chosen to heal a nation is one thing, right? Actually doing it is a whole different ballgame. The literal second Ford sat down behind the resolute desk, he was slammed with a turbulent domestic reality. The environment he instantly inherited was, frankly, incredibly chaotic. He was tasked with fixing a nation that was suffering from the deep, lingering psychological traumas of the Watergate scandal. But on top of that, the country was dealing with rapidly rising inflation, a severely depressed domestic economy, and chronic energy shortages that were messing with Americans' daily lives across the entire country. To address the first of those massive crises, Ford made what is probably his most intensely debated decision. He granted a full pardon to former President Richard Nixon. And just to be clear about his strictly stated motivation for this, it was entirely about a desire to calm the continuing, highly divisive traumas of Watergate. He firmly believed that as long as Nixon's legal battles were dominating the headlines every single day, the country simply wouldn't be able to heal, move forward, and tackle its other massive problems. But Ford was also fighting a completely different kind of battle on the domestic front against a Democratic Congress. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it all boils down to one massive number: 39. That is the staggering amount of vetoes he issued in just his first 14 months in office. You might be wondering, why so many vetoes? Well, looking back at those exact crises we just talked about, Ford was deeply fearful of skyrocketing inflation and a ballooning budgetary deficit. So to combat this, he vigorously used his presidential veto power, specifically targeting non-military appropriations bills that he felt would just increase that deficit even further. And here's the thing, despite facing a completely Democratic Congress, his vetoes were usually sustained. It really proved his effectiveness in these fierce fiscal battles. Section 4. Navigating the global stage. Now, while he was holding the line domestically, Ford was also constantly looking outward. And he actually gave us a perfectly structured framework for understanding his wildly diverse policy decisions. He described his own political identity exactly like this. He said he was a moderate in domestic affairs, a conservative in fiscal affairs, which, perfectly explains those 39 vetoes we were just talking about, and a dyed-in-the-wool internationalist in foreign affairs. And that internationalist approach, it was absolutely critical because the global stage was incredibly fragile at the time. Ford's administration actively worked on three major global fronts. First, they desperately sought to revive U.S. power and prestige following the collapse of Cambodia and South Vietnam. Then, over in the Middle East, preventing a new war was a paramount objective. He provided crucial aid to both Israel and Egypt, helping persuade them to accept an interim truce. And on top of all that, he continued the delicate policy of détente with the Soviet Union, working directly with Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev to set new, vital limitations on nuclear weapons. Section 5. A legacy of healing. As we move into the conclusion of his political career, we really see that the hard choices Ford made took a heavy political toll. Going into the 1976 election, he faced a very serious primary challenge from right within his own party by former California Governor Ronald Reagan. And while Ford did survive that primary, the challenge definitely weakened him politically, and he ultimately lost the general election in a super narrow defeat to Jimmy Carter. Following that election, Gerald and Betty Ford packed up and retired to California. But their service to the public, it definitely didn't end there. Mrs. Ford bravely sought treatment for her own drug and alcohol problems, and after her amazing recovery, she used her national platform to open the Betty Ford Center, creating this beautiful, lasting legacy of helping others who were facing those exact same struggles. And this brilliantly illustrates how the true impact of Ford's time in office was cemented the very day he left it. When Jimmy Carter gave his inaugural address in 1977, he took power by speaking these exact words: "For myself and for our nation, I want to thank my predecessor for all he has done to heal our land." It just perfectly bookended Ford's overarching mission, doesn't it? He started his presidency declaring the national nightmare over, and his successor thanked him for healing the land. Gerald Ford lived long enough to see this incredible legacy cemented, passing away in 2006 at the age of 93. So we've seen how a man who was literally never elected to the executive branch stepped into a void of unprecedented chaos, using his unshakable reputation for integrity to try and stabilize a deeply wounded country. But it leaves us with a pretty provocative thought. Could an unelected leader successfully heal a fractured nation in today's political climate? It's a fascinating question, and one that makes diving into our constitutional history so incredibly rewarding. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.